we are looking at a figure today who effectively split the timeline of Western thought in two. Before him, you have the pre-Socratics looking at the stars, trying to figure out if the universe is made of water or fire.
All external stuff. The cosmos, the material world.
Exactly. And then after him, the focus turns violently inward. It becomes about the human soul, ethics, and the terrifying question of how to live.
But the man responsible for this shift is a walking paradox.
Yeah?
He's arguably the most famous thinker in history, yet he wrote down absolutely nothing.
Not a single word. It's the ultimate historical irony, isn't it?
It really is. We have a man who defined the concept of wisdom for the Western world, yet everything we know about him is hearsay. It's secondhand. We were relying entirely on the memories of his friends and, well, his enemies.
And physically, he's the complete antithesis of the Greek ideal. We tend to picture Greek philosophers as these dignified marble statue figures, perfectly proportioned, serene.
Right. The image of perfection.
But the sources describe Socrates as, well, aggressively ugly. We're talking about a man with a snub nose, flaring nostrils, bulging crab-like eyes set wide apart, and a significant potbelly.
He was often compared to a satyr or a Solanus, those mythical, sort of beast-like followers of Dionysus.
Which in a culture like Athens, that's a huge deal.
Oh, it's a massive deal. They were obsessed with this idea of kallikigathia, the belief that outer beauty reflects inner goodness.
A beautiful soul in a beautiful body.
Precisely. And Socrates was a walking contradiction to that. He looked like a beast on the outside, but his friends, like Alcibiades, claimed he hid divine images of gold on the inside.
That sets the stakes for this deep dive perfectly. We aren't just talking about a philosophy professor in an ivory tower.
No, not at all.
We're talking about a soldier, a stonecutter, a midwife of ideas, and eventually a political scapegoat executed by the very democracy he tried to improve.
And to get there, to even begin to understand him, we have to navigate what scholars call the Socratic problem.
Right, the problem of the sources.
Since he left no writings, we have to triangulate his life using three very different and very conflicting maps. First, you have Plato,
his star student,
who paints him as this metaphysical genius, a secular saint who calmly debates the immortality of the soul as he's about to die.
Then you have Xenophon,
who gives us a much more down-to-earth Socrates, a practical, pious, maybe slightly boring moral advisor who tells you how to manage your estate and be a good citizen.
And then there's the third source, the hit job.
Aristophanes, the comic playwright.
In his play, The Clouds.
Exactly. He gives us this wild caricature of Socrates as a dangerous sophist, a con artist who floats around in a basket and teaches people how to argue their way out of paying their debts.
So our mission today is to sift through the saint, the soldier, and the con artist to try and find the real human being at the center of it all.
It's a detective story, really.
Let's start at the beginning, then. Let's try to unravel the man behind the myth. We all know how it ends, with the cup of hemlock. But where does a character like this actually come from? Was he, part of the Athenian elite?
Oh, far from it. He was born around 469 BC in Alapais, which was a deme, a sort of district just outside the main walls of Athens.
So not from the city center?
No. And his family was solidly middle class, maybe even lower middle class by some standards, but certainly not destitute. His father, Sophroniscus, was a stonemason or a sculptor.
That's interesting because there's a tradition, isn't there, that Socrates briefly worked as a sculptor himself. I think the travel writer Pausanias claimed a statue group on the Acropolis was carved by him.
It's a debated detail, but it fits poetically, doesn't it? The discipline of chiseling away excess stone to reveal the true form hidden inside. It's a perfect metaphor for what he'd later do with arguments.
He's chipping away at false beliefs to reveal the truth.
Exactly. But the more profound influence, the one he talked about all the time, was his mother, Phanerette.
She was a midwife.
Yes, and I want to pause on this because, like you said, he didn't just mention this in passing. He built his entire philosophical identity around this concept. He called his method meutics.
The art of midwifery.
And this is absolutely crucial to understanding why he was so infuriating to the people of Athens. A midwife in ancient Greece was typically a woman who was, past childbearing age herself.
So she couldn't give birth anymore.
Right, but she had the skill, the techne, to help others deliver their babies.
Mm-hmm.
Socrates claimed the exact same thing for himself intellectually. He said he was barren of wisdom.
I have no new ideas. I have no doctrines, no lectures to give you.
Precisely. So when people came to him expecting to be taught, expecting him to pour knowledge into their heads like they were empty vessels, he essentially said, I have nothing to give you.
but I can help you labor to bring out what is already inside you.
And labor's the right word, because it's painful. Socrates saw his job as not just delivering these intellectual babies, but testing them.
What do you mean by testing them?
Well, he'd help a young man articulate an idea, a definition of justice, for example. And if the idea was true and beautiful, Socrates would nurture it. But if it was false, what he called a wind egg or a phantom, he would expose it and force the young man to discard it.
No matter how much the young man loved his own idea.
No matter how much. And that's a violent image for a teacher, isn't it? I'm going to have you birth this thought, and then if I think it's ugly or malformed, we're going to toss it.
Yeah, that's not going to win you many friends, especially among the powerful.
And that's why he insisted he wasn't a teacher in the conventional sense.
Yeah.
It's also why he never took money, which was a huge distinction between him and the sophists.
Right. The sophists were the traveling intellectuals who charged exorbitant fees to teach rhetoric and how to be successful.
They essentially taught the sons of the rich how to win arguments in the assembly and the law courts. Socrates thought that was prostitution of the mind.
Prostitution of the mind. That's a strong phrase.
He believed that if you sold your wisdom, you became a servant to the buyer. Your goal was to please the customer, not to find the truth. By remaining poor, he remained free.
Free to question anyone, rich or poor, without obligation.
Without any obligation at all, his only master was his search for the truth.
Let's talk about his domestic life, because this is where the historical gossip really picks up. He marries a woman named Xanthippe, and for 2,000 years, she has been the poster child for the shrew, the nagging, angry, unbearable wife.
History has been incredibly unfair to Xanthippe. The anecdotes are famous, of course.
The one everyone knows is her dumping a bucket of water on his head.
Right. She was screaming at him and he wasn't reacting, so she just dumped a chamber pot or a bucket of water over his head. And Socrates supposedly just laughed it off and said, "I knew that after the thunder would come the rain."
Which, it makes him look like a patient saint.
And it makes her look like a monster.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the source bias here. These stories were written down by men who idolized Socrates. They were part of his fan club.
Of course. They're trying to build up his legend.
But if we look closer, even within those same sources, we can see a different, more complicated picture. Xenophon records a conversation between Socrates and his eldest son, Lamprocles.
And the son is complaining about his mother.
He's complaining about her temper, saying she says things that no one could bear to hear.
And you'd expect Socrates to just agree, right? To say, yeah, son, she's a nightmare. Just try to ignore her.
But he doesn't do that at all. He actually reprimands the son. He asks him, does she bite you? Does she physically hurt you? He reminds the boy of all the things his mother does for him, that when he's sick, she's the one who cares for him.
So he defends her.
He defends her. He points out that her intensity, her anger, comes from a deep desire for her children to be good and successful. It suggests that Socrates understood her frustration.
And honestly, can you blame her? I mean, think about her situation.
Put yourself in her shoes.
You're married to a man who refuses to work for money, spends all day long just arguing in the marketplace, brings home no income, and on top of that, he's constantly antagonizing the most powerful people in the city. They were living in poverty because of his divine mission.
Exactly. Being married to a philosopher saint is probably a practical nightmare for the person who has to, balance the household budget and feed the children.
And despite all that, she was loyal. She was there at the prison in the end, weeping for him with their 3 sons. That doesn't sound like a monster to me.
No, it sounds like a wife who loved her difficult, impossible husband.
Speaking of family complications, there's this weird outlier in the sources about a second wife, a woman named Myrto.
This is a fascinating historical puzzle. Some of the later sources, like Diogenes Laertius, suggest Socrates had 2 wives, possibly at the same time.
2 wives. So bigamy.
Potentially. The claim is that during the Peloponnesian War, the male population of Athens was so depleted by casualties that a decree was passed allowing men to marry one Athenian woman and also have children with another to help repopulate the city.
Wow. That sounds like a truly desperate measure for a desperate time.
It was a desperate time. And the story goes that Myrto was the granddaughter of a very famous and respected statesman, Aristides the Just. But his family had fallen on hard times, and she was left destitute.
So Socrates took her in.
The story is that he took her in not out of any romantic desire, but out of a sense of civic duty, to protect the family line of a great man who had served Athens well.
So we don't know for sure if it was actual bigamy or more of a guardianship.
It's debated. But either way, it reinforces this idea of Socrates as a man who did strange things for what he believed were profound moral reasons, completely regardless of social norms.
He certainly didn't care about social norms when it came to his appearance or his personal comfort. We touched on his ugliness, but it went beyond that. He seemed to actively reject comfort.
He was completely indifferent to heat and cold. The sources all agree on this. He walked barefoot everywhere, on stone, on dirt.
Even in winter, on the ice.
Even on the ice. And he wore the same shabby cloak, the tribon, all year round, whether it was the height of summer or the dead of winter.
And this wasn't just because he was poor, it was a choice.
It was a form of training. The Greeks call it askesis discipline, practice. He wanted to prove that the mind, the soul, could have complete mastery over the body and its desires.
Which brings us to a part of his life that I think is the most overlooked. We always picture the old man in the marketplace sitting on a step and talking.
The armchair philosopher.
Right. But for a significant portion of his life, Socrates was a soldier, a hoplite, heavy infantry.
This is absolutely essential. I don't think you can understand his moral philosophy, especially his courage at his trial, without understanding his military service.
And he didn't just serve. He served with distinction in 3 major campaigns during the Peloponnesian War.
The big ones. Potidaea, Dulium, and Amphipolis. He was in the thick of it.
Let's zoom in on the siege of Potidaea. That was in 432 BC. So this is before he's the famous old man. He's in his late 30s.
Right, he's in his prime. And the conditions at that siege were brutal. Potidaea is up in the north of Greece. It was a long siege, and the winter was incredibly severe.
The other Athenian soldiers were miserable.
They were freezing. Alcibiades later recounts how they were all wrapping their feet in felt and sheepskins just to avoid getting frostbite. And then you have Socrates marching out onto the frost, completely barefoot, wearing just his usual thin cloak.
And the other soldiers kind of hated him for it, didn't they?
They took it personally. They thought he was showing off or mocking their weakness. But for Socrates, it was just maintenance. It was his daily practice of mastering the body.
And it was at Potidaea that we see the first recorded flash of his extraordinary courage in combat.
Yes, and this story involves Alcibiades.
The golden boy of Athens. Brilliant, handsome, rich, and notoriously reckless.
The future celebrity politician and traitor of Athens. He was just a young man then. During a skirmish, the Athenian line broke and started to retreat. Alcibiades was wounded and fell.
In the chaos of a rout, a wounded man on the ground is usually finished off.
Almost always. But Socrates stood over him.
He became a human shield.
He single-handedly defended the wounded Alcibiades against the enemy, saving not just his life but also his armor. And in Greek hoplite culture, saving the armor is a huge deal.
Losing your shield and armor was the ultimate disgrace.
It meant you dropped it to run away faster. So Socrates saves Alcibiades' life and his honor.
And the kicker is what happened after the battle. The generals, recognizing his bravery, wanted to give Socrates the prize for valor, the ancient equivalent of a Medal of Honor.
And Socrates flatly refused. He went to the generals and argued that they should give the prize to Alcibiades instead.
Why would he do that?
He wanted to encourage the young, ambitious man's desire for virtue. It shows his complete lack of personal ego. He did the heroic deed, but he didn't need the public recognition, the badge.
So if Potidaea showed his loyalty and courage, the Battle of Delium in 424 BC showed his terrifying composure under pressure.
Terrifying is the right word. Delium wasn't just a loss for Athens. It was a catastrophe.
Total rout.
A complete disaster. The Athenian army was crushed by the Boeotians. It was panic everywhere. Men throwing away their shields, trampling each other to get away. This is the moment where most people, even brave soldiers, lose their minds to fear.
And Socrates is in the middle of this retreat, but he's not running.
No. Alcibiades, who was on horseback and could get away safely, looked back and saw Socrates. And he described him as stalking like a pelican, scanning the battlefield from side to side with those famous bulging eyes of his.
What does that even mean, stalking like a pelican?
It means he was retreating with purpose and awareness. He was so calm, so obviously alert and ready to defend himself, that the enemy soldiers actually steered clear of him. They went after the easier targets, the ones who were panicking.
He literally saved himself by looking too dangerous to attack.
That specific look, that ability to stare down death without blinking, is the exact same moral and psychological skill he brings to his trial 25 years later.
How so?
In his defense, he says that philosophy is a post, or a station assigned to him by the god. Just as he wouldn't abandon his post in battle at Delium, he could not abandon his mission of questioning his fellow citizens, even if it meant death. For him, they were the same kind of courage.
So we have the physical toughness, we have the military discipline. Now we need the spark that turns him from a brave soldier into the gadfly of Athens. And that story starts with a trip to the Oracle of Delphi.
It actually starts with his friend, a man named Chaerephon. Chaerephon was apparently a bit intense, very enthusiastic.
And he goes to Delphi, which is, the most sacred site in the Greek world, the center of the universe.
And he walks into the temple of Apollo and asks the oracle, the Pythia, a very direct and frankly arrogant question. He asks, is there anyone wiser than Socrates?
And the priestess, channeling the god, gives a straight answer.
No.
Now, most people would hear that and, frame that certificate and hang it on their wall.
Yeah.
The god says I'm the smartest person alive.
Right. It's the ultimate validation.
Yeah.
But Socrates was horrified. He fell into a deep crisis of purpose because he practiced introspection. He knew himself. And he knew with absolute certainty that he possessed no special wisdom. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a statesman. He wasn't a great poet.
So he assumes the god must be speaking in a riddle.
Exactly. He concludes, it's not a statement of fact, but a puzzle to be solved. So he sets out on a mission to disprove the oracle.
How do you even go about disproving a god?
He thinks, if I can find just one person who is demonstrably wiser than me, I can go back to the god and say, look, you were wrong. This man here is wiser.
So he begins his investigation, his quest, and he goes to the politicians first.
Always a disappointing place to start when you're looking for wisdom.
You would think so.
And he found exactly what you'd expect. The politicians were full of hot air. They could give powerful speeches using big words like justice and virtue and piety. But when he pressed them for a clear, consistent definition, they just crumbled.
They thought they knew what they were talking about, but they didn't.
They didn't. Next, he goes to the poets.
The creators of the great tragedies and comedies.
And he found that the poets wrote beautiful, profound things. But when Socrates asked them to explain what their own poems meant, they couldn't do it any better than anyone else in the room.
So what did he conclude from that?
He realized they were creating not from wisdom or knowledge, but from some kind of divine inspiration. They were conduits for the muses, not thinkers themselves.
Okay, so politicians are out, poets are out. Finally, he goes to the craftsmen, the artisans, the manual laborers.
And here he actually found knowledge. They knew things. A shoemaker knew how to make shoes. A shipwright knew how to build a ship. A sculptor knew how to work stone. Socrates deeply respected that technical skill.
There's always a but with Socrates.
There's always a but. He found a fatal flaw in their wisdom. Because they were experts in their specific craft, they assumed they were also experts in everything else.
The shoemaker thought he knew how to run the city.
Exactly. Their arrogance in their one small area of expertise bled into every other aspect of life. And so this whole investigation leads him to a profound realization.
The famous double ignorance.
Yes. Everyone else he questioned was suffering from double ignorance. First, they didn't know the truth about these important ethical concepts. And second, they didn't know that they didn't know.
Whereas Socrates
possessed what's sometimes called docta ignorantia, learned ignorance. He also didn't know. But he knew that he didn't know. And that tiny, crucial sliver of self-awareness was the only thing that made him wiser than everyone else.
And this brings us to the famous Socratic method, the elenchus. We hear this term all the time, but I feel like people often treat it as just asking questions. It's more aggressive than that, isn't it? It's a tool, a weapon.
It is intellectual combat. The goal of the elenchus is not to teach a new fact or to win a debate. The goal is to test the internal consistency of a person's beliefs.
To see if their ideas can withstand scrutiny.
Exactly. And it almost always follows the same structure. Socrates will ask for a definition of a major moral term. Let's take the dialogue Laches, where he asks two famous generals, what is courage?
Okay, so the General Laches gives a pretty straightforward answer. He says, courage is standing your ground in battle and not running away. Sounds reasonable.
It sounds perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
But Socrates immediately introduces a counterexample. He asks, what about the Scythian cavalry? They're famous for fighting by pretending to retreat and then shooting arrows backward. Are they cowards?
And Laches has to say, no, of course not. They're famously courageous warriors.
So the initial definition, standing your ground, is refuted. It's too narrow. It doesn't account for all cases of courage.
So Laches has to try again.
He tries again. He says, okay, courage is a sort of endurance of the soul, a much broader definition.
And Socrates will attack that one too. Is all endurance courageous? What about foolish endurance? If I endure in a bad investment, losing all my family's money out of sheer stubbornness, is that courage?
No, Laches has to admit that's just foolishness. Courage must be a wise endurance. But then Socrates flips it again. He asks about a soldier who holds his post, knowing he has reinforcements coming, versus a soldier who holds his post, not knowing if he's all alone, who is more courageous.
The one who endures despite the greater fear and uncertainty.
So sometimes courage is a kind of unwise endurance from a purely calculating perspective. And eventually, Laches is just tied in an intellectual knot.
That knot has a name, doesn't it?
Aporia. It literally means pathlessness or blockage.
Mm-hmm.
The person he's questioning is stuck. They realize for the first time that they don't actually know what courage is, even though they spent their whole life supposedly practicing it.
And this is where people get really, really angry. Because it feels like Socrates is just tearing them down. He doesn't offer a correct definition at the end of the conversation.
Never. He just leaves them in the ruins of their own shattered arguments.
Which feels cruel.
It feels cruel. But for Socrates, that destruction was an act of profound philosophical love. He believed that holding a false belief, especially about something important like justice or courage, was a disease of the soul.
And you can't learn the truth if you're convinced you already know it.
You cannot.
Yeah.
By inducing aporia, he was clearing away the rubble of false opinion so that real, genuine inquiry could finally begin.
The problem is, when you clear the ground of a powerful politician in front of a crowd of his supporters and a bunch of laughing teenagers, you aren't making friends.
You're making lifelong, powerful enemies. And that's exactly what happened. The youth of Athens, the wealthy sons of the elite who had a lot of leisure time, they followed Socrates around like he was a spectator sport. They loved watching the pompous elders get publicly humiliated.
And those elders would blame Socrates for it. This is the root of the corrupting the youth charge.
Absolutely. They saw him teaching their sons to be disrespectful and to question all authority.
There's one other element of his method, if you can call it that we have to clarify because it plays a huge role in his trial. The daimonion, the divine sign, the voice.
This is the most mystical, and to his enemies, the most suspicious part of Socrates. He claimed that since childhood, a divine sign or a voice would come to him.
Like a guardian angel?
Sort of, but it had a very specific and limited function. He said it was apotroptic. It only ever told him what not to do. It never gave him positive commands.
It was a cosmic stop button, a divine veto.
A perfect way to put it. It stopped him from entering politics when he was a young man. And he later claimed that if he had entered the political arena with his refusal to compromise, he would have been killed long ago and done no good for anyone.
No, it saved his life.
He believed it did. But to his enemies, a man claiming to have a private hotline to some unnamed divine entity sounded dangerous. It sounded like he was inventing his own new religion and disrespecting the gods of the city.
Which brings us to the political friction. We've established he was annoying. We've established he humiliated powerful people. But you don't execute a 70-year-old man just for being annoying. There was a much darker political context to his trial.
You have to look at the timeline. In 404 BC, after nearly 30 years of war, Athens loses. The Peloponnesian War is over. The Spartan army marches in, tears down the city's defensive long walls. The democracy is abolished, and Sparta installs a brutal pro-Spartan puppet government, the 30 Tyrants.
And this was a nightmare regime for Athens.
It was a bloodbath, a reign of terror. They executed about 1,500 citizens in just 8 months. They confiscated property to pay their Spartan guards.
And the leader of this horrific group was a man named Critias.
Critias, a brilliant, ruthless aristocrat. And he was a former student, or at least an associate, of Socrates.
And Alcibiades, the traitor who had defected to Sparta and helped bring Athens to its knees.
Another famous associate of Socrates. So you have to see this from the perspective of the average Athenian citizen after the tyrants are overthrown and democracy is restored.
They look at Socrates, and they don't just see a quirky philosopher.
They see the intellectual father of the very men who had just destroyed their city, murdered their relatives, and dismantled their democracy. It's guilt by association on a massive scale.
And it's a powerful charge, whether it's fair or not.
It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But the great tragedy of it all, and this shows his true character, is that Socrates defied the tyrants just as fiercely as he defied the democracy. He was not a partisan. He answered only to his own conscience and the law.
We have two incredibly clear examples of this courage. First, under the democracy, just before the end of the war, the trial of the generals.
Yes, 406 BC, after the naval battle of Arginussae. Athens wins a major victory, but a sudden storm blows in and prevents the generals from rescuing the survivors from the wrecked ships and the sailors in the water.
And thousands of Athenian sailors drown.
The city goes insane with grief and rage. The public assembly demands that the 8 generals be tried en masse all together in a single trial and executed.
Which was completely illegal. Athenian law guaranteed every citizen an individual trial.
It was mob justice. And by sheer chance, Socrates happened to be serving on the city council that day. It was his turn to be the presiding officer, the one who had to put the motion to a vote.
So he was the one man standing between the mob and this illegal trial.
The only one. The crowd was screaming for blood, threatening to arrest and execute the council members themselves if they didn't comply. Everyone else buckled under the pressure. Socrates stood alone. He refused, saying, "I will not act contrary to the law."
He risked being lynched right there in the assembly to uphold the principle of due process.
He did. And then, just 2 years later, under the opposite regime, the 30 tyrants, he does it again.
This is the story of Leon of Salamis.
The tyrants, led by his former student Critias, wanted to implicate as many people as possible in their crimes. They summoned Socrates and 4 other men and gave them an order. Go to the island of Salamis and arrest an innocent man named Leon so he could be brought back for a summary execution.
They just wanted his money and wanted to make Socrates and the others accomplices.
Exactly. The other 4 men went and arrested Leon, who was then killed. What did Socrates do?
He just walked home.
He just quietly went home. It's such a powerful act of nonviolent defiance. He didn't make a big speech. He just refused to participate in state-sanctioned murder.
And he says in his apology that he would have been executed for that act of disobedience for sure.
Absolutely. But the tyranny was overthrown shortly after, so he survived. He survived the democratic mob, and he survived the oligarchic tyrants. But in a strange twist of fate, he couldn't survive the restored democracy.
Which brings us to 399 BC, the trial. The democracy is back, but it's fragile, it's paranoid, they're looking for scapegoats, for a way to cleanse the city of the spiritual pollution of the war years and the tyranny.
But there was a legal catch. To prevent an endless cycle of revenge killings, the restored democracy had passed a general amnesty. You could not prosecute anyone for political crimes committed before 403 BC.
So his main accusers, Anytus, Miletus, and Lycon, they couldn't charge Socrates for teaching the traitor Critias. That was off the table, covered by the amnesty.
They had to get creative. They had to find new charges that weren't political.
So they pivoted to religion and social corruption.
The official indictment read, Socrates is guilty of corrupting the youth and of not believing in the gods the city believes in, but in other new spiritual things.
The new spiritual things is a clear reference to his daimonion.
No doubt. So we have a massive jury of 501 Athenian citizens. It's a huge public spectacle. Socrates, now 70 years old, stands up to give his apologia, which doesn't mean apology, it means defense.
And this is where he absolutely refuses to play the game.
The standard legal strategy in an Athenian court was all about pity and pandering. You'd bring your wife and your weeping children to the stand, you'd beg the jury for mercy, you'd remind them of your service to the state.
Socrates thought that was shameful.
He said it was a disgrace to himself and to the city. He treated the jury not as his judges, but as just another group of Athenians who needed to be philosophically examined.
He starts cross-examining his own prosecutor, Miletus, right in the middle of the trial.
He completely humiliates him. He traps Miletus into saying that Socrates is a complete atheist who believes in no gods, and then immediately points out that the charge itself says he believes in new spiritual things. You can't be an atheist and believe in new spiritual things. He makes the prosecution look incompetent.
But then he goes even further. He doesn't just defend himself, he provokes them. He tells the jury that he is a gift from the god to the city of Athens.
This is the famous gadfly metaphor. He says the city is like a large, lazy, noble horse, and he has been sent by the god to be a gadfly, a stinging insect, to bite it and wake it up, to keep it from falling into a dull sleep.
If you kill me, he says, you will not easily find another like me.
To the jury, this didn't sound like a defense. This sounded like unbearable divine arrogance.
And the vote comes in. It was close, wasn't it?
Shockingly close. The verdict is guilty, but by a vote of 280 to 221, a swing of just 30 votes would have acquitted him.
So a significant portion of the jury was on his side, or at least unconvinced of his guilt.
It suggests that despite his annoying methods, many Athenians respected him, or at least believed he wasn't a criminal.
But then comes the second part, the sentencing phase. And this is where Socrates effectively commits suicide by speech.
In the Athenian legal system, if the verdict was guilty, the prosecution would propose a penalty, in this case death. Then the defense would propose a counter penalty. The jury had to choose between the two. They couldn't invent a third option.
And everyone in the courtroom expected Socrates to propose exile.
It was the obvious, sensible choice. I'll leave town and never bother you again. If he'd offered that, they almost certainly would have accepted it. It was the easy way out for everyone.
But Socrates refuses exile.
He argues that the unexamined life is not worth living. He says if he goes to another city, he'll just do the same thing there, ask questions, and the young people will flock to him and the elders will get angry and kick him out again. He cannot stop his mission. It's who he is.
So when asked what he deserves for his behavior, for being the gadfly, he gives the most audacious, inflammatory answer in legal history.
He says, "What do I deserve for being a benefactor to you all, for neglecting my own affairs and my own wealth to care for the state of your souls? I propose free meals for life in the Prytaneum."
The Prytaneum, that was the sacred state dining hall reserved for Olympic victors and national heroes.
He was, while on trial for his life, asking to be honored like a champion athlete. The jury was stunned. Then they were furious. They saw it as the ultimate mockery of the court and of them.
He does eventually, after his friends pressure him, offer to pay a fine 30 minae, a substantial sum guaranteed by Plato and others. But the damage was done. The mood had irrevocably shifted.
The second vote, the one for the penalty, was a landslide.
360 for death, 140 against.
Which means 80 people who had originally voted that he was innocent now voted to kill him.
He literally annoyed them into executing him.
He forced them to choose between honoring him as a hero or killing him as a criminal. He left no middle ground, and they chose death.
So he's sent to prison. But there's a delay. Because of a religious festival, a sacred ship had been sent to the island of Delos. No executions could be carried out until it returned.
So he has to wait in prison for 30 days. And this period gives us one of Plato's most moving dialogues, the Credo.
Crito is his old, wealthy friend. He shows up at the prison before dawn.
He's bribed the guards, the door is open, the escape plan is ready. He begs Socrates to leave. He says, think of your children, think of your reputation. What will people say about us, your friends, if we are so cheap and cowardly that we let you die when we could have saved you?
And Socrates, calm as ever, gives this incredible argument about the nature of law and society, this social contract.
He personifies the laws of Athens. He imagines the laws themselves speaking to him.
And what do they say?
They say, Socrates, we gave you life. We oversaw your parents' marriage. We provided for your education. We protected you. You have lived under us in our city for 70 years. You could have left at any time if you didn't like us, but you chose to stay, which was your agreement to obey us.
And now that the laws are inconvenient for you, you want to break your agreement and destroy us.
Do you think a city can survive if its individual citizens can decide which laws to obey and which to ignore? He argues that to break the law, even an unjust one, is to commit an act of violence against the entire city.
Two wrongs don't make a right.
He concludes that it is better to suffer injustice than to commit it. If he escapes, he confirms the jury's verdict that he is a lawbreaker and a bad citizen. By staying and dying, he proves his ultimate loyalty to the principle of law itself, even when it is used against him.
So Crito is silenced, and the day of execution arrives. This is the final scene from Plato's Phaedo.
The sun is setting. His friends are gathered around him, weeping. He gently sends Xanthippe and the women away, not because he's unfeeling, but because he doesn't want their crying to disturb the philosophical conversation about the soul he wants to have.
He even takes a bath beforehand so that the women won't have to wash his corpse. Practical to the very end.
Finally, the jailer, who is also in tears, brings the cup of hemlock.
And we should clarify the medical reality here. Hemlock isn't a violent poison that causes convulsions. It's a neurotoxin.
It causes a gradual ascending paralysis, starting from the extremities. Socrates took the cup cheerfully, without any trembling. He followed the executioner's instructions, walked around until his legs began to feel heavy, and then he lay down on the cot.
His friends watched as the numbness moved up his feet, to his legs, to his waist.
He covered his face with his cloak, and then, just before the end, he uncovered it for one last sentence.
Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay it and do not neglect it.
Asclepius was the god of healing. The tradition was that you would sacrifice a rooster to him when you were cured of a sickness.
The famous interpretation from Nietzsche is a very dark one. He saw this as Socrates saying, life itself is a disease and death is the cure. That he was a pessimist who wanted to escape life.
That's the dark reading. But there's another reading that's much more consistent with everything Socrates says in the Phaedo. Throughout that final conversation, Socrates argues that the body is a kind of prison or a distraction for the soul. It makes us hungry, tired, lustful, and clouds our reason. Death, for the philosopher, is the liberation of the soul from the body, allowing it to finally see truth clearly.
So he isn't saying life is a disease. He's saying he is finally being healed of the limitations of the physical body.
Exactly. Or there's an even simpler, more literal interpretation.
That he just remembered he owed someone a chicken.
He just remembered he had an unpaid religious debt to a temple, and he didn't want to leave this world with his accounts unsettled. Pious to the very last breath.
And in dying that way, by choosing to obey an unjust sentence, he became the first true martyr for free conscience, for free speech.
He showed that there are some principles that are more important than mere survival.
It's chilling to think that Athens regretted it almost immediately. The sources say a plague hit the city, and they blamed it on the execution.
They did. They felt the loss. The men who accused him were eventually driven into exile or forced to commit suicide. But the real victory belonged to Plato. By writing the Apology, the Credo, and the Phaedo, Plato ensured that the trial of Socrates would be relitigated in every classroom in every generation for the next 2,400 years.
The jury killed the man, but they immortalized the questioner.
They made him eternal.
And that really leaves us with a provocative thought for today. We love to quote Socrates now. We put, "The unexamined life is not worth living" on t-shirts and coffee mugs.
We celebrate him as a hero of free thought.
But if he were here today, really here, scruffy, unwashed, stopping you in the middle of your commute to ask why you vote the way you do, or why you prioritize making money over cultivating virtue, trapping you in the contradictions of your own logic.
If he was on social media or in our town squares, dismantling our most cherished political, religious, or social beliefs, showing us that we don't really know what we think we know.
Would we celebrate him? Or would we find him just as annoying, just as dangerous, just as intolerable as the Athenians did? Would we be the ones looking for a way to silence him, voting for the hemlock just to get some peace and quiet?
It's a question that requires some Socratic self-examination, I think.
If you enjoyed this journey through the life of the man who knew nothing, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm find other curious minds. And please subscribe to History Titans.
We have more deep dives coming up on the figures who built and sometimes broke our world.
Share this with a friend who loves a tough debate, or maybe just someone you think needs to question their assumptions a little more. Until next time.
Stay curious.